You don't want to never count yourself out, make it a great one. Just be sure to leave out the doubt, time to wake up.
Welcome back to the People Development Podcast, brought to you by Living Water Consulting. Hey, on this podcast, we believe that growing yourself is best achieved when you help to develop the people around you. I'm your host, Harrison Tash, and with me today is Radhika Dutt. Now, Radhika is the author of Radical Product Thinking, a seasoned consultant and dynamic speaker known for driving transformative change across industries, from telecom and finance to robotics and consumer apps. With MIT degrees and a track record of successful startups and acquisitions, she empowers organizations to turn bold vision into real results. And this is why I'm excited to have her on here, because real results is what we all want in our businesses and in our lives. And I am really excited to have her. So, Radhika, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am too. You know, as an author, I saw your book and I'm like, man, we got to get this lady on the podcast, because what a cool book title, Radical Product Thinking. What a great book. And after having some time to get to know you and talk and stuff, I was really excited to talk about this concept. And I know we're not going to dive into the book as much on this podcast. Really, we're talking about escaping this performance trap. And so I'm really excited about that topic. But why don't you tell the guests just a little bit about yourself, and your book, Radical Product Thinking, and then we'll get into some of the topic today.
Sounds great. So I'll share the backstory of why radical product thinking came about. And the answer to that is it came from a lot of the mistakes that I'd made along the way. The hard lessons.
like all of us, right? Yeah, perfect.
Exactly, right. So the backstory is, I'd graduated, or not even after graduation, like right in our dorm rooms at MIT, we started our first startup. It was called Lobby 7. We wanted to revolutionize wireless. That was our vision. And, 25 years later, I still don't know what we meant back then about revolutionizing wireless.
Yeah.
Right? It was funny. A product disease that I now call hero syndrome, where it was all about scale, going big, but we didn't have a clear definition of what is the problem that we're setting out to solve. And what I found was, over the course of my career, early in my career, I kept making mistakes and catching product diseases. And these product diseases are so easy to catch. So I'll just mention a few diseases. And, I think our listeners, it'll resonate because you've probably either caught or experienced these, right? So there's pivotitis, where you pivot from one shiny idea to the next. Then there's obsessive sales disorder, right? This was one that I contributed to myself, where you're constantly deviating from the vision to constantly chase short-term gains, right? Yeah. And another one is strategic swelling, where your product just grows and grows, and it'll even make coffee for you if you just ask nicely. And it's trying to do everything for everyone. So that's strategic swelling. But these are the examples of diseases, and radical product thinking came about because I had a burning question. Is it that we're all doomed to learning from making these mistakes and having to learn through trial and error how to create transformative change and how to build these transformative products? Or is there a systematic, step-by-step process that we can give people to build these transformative products? And the name Radical Product Thinking is because a lot of the ideas that are in the book are radical and they challenge conventional thinking. Conventional thinking is, you need a big, aspirational, grand vision that never changes. And what I found is such a vision is actually useless.
Yeah. Well, when you talked about, what is it, pivotitis or something, right? Like this concept, it's almost like being entertained, right? And I think we have been taught to try to get people motivated, but there's a disconnect there that I think happens when we have these grand, unobtainable type of vague visions that aren't really motivating people. They're actually creating this disillusion. It's creating, ambiguity. And so you talk a lot about this in there, which is just, it's such a problem of not only big corporations, but even small businesses that have caught it and said like, oh, we need to do this too, right?
You're so right. And there's so much to unpack even in what you just said, because, we think that our vision has to be inspiring and short and memorable. So then we create vision statements like there was a startup that said, our vision is democratizing justice, just like we had revolutionizing wireless, right? And a person at the startup was sharing how, yeah, that was our vision, democratizing justice. But were we actually democratizing justice? No, we were building a product that high-end law firms used. Like,
Yeah,
why
yeah.
why couldn't we just be honest about the change that we're creating and talk about what is it that we're doing for these law firms? We can be honest, and that can be our shared purpose. Like my own experience has been, there was a point where I was working at a company where we were building a product for creating TV ad sales quotes. TV ad sales, right? There's nothing less inspiring than TV ad sales. and
Yeah.
and yet we had this clear sense of shared purpose in terms of what is the problem that we're solving for those people working on TV ad campaigns, and how are we going to create a product that addresses that particular need, and what is the change we're going to bring about in the world. And you can do it in a way that matches your values and define exactly what change you're trying to create, the problem you're trying to solve, and how you'll solve it.
Well, you bring up a great point, and I actually write about this as well, which is oftentimes these vague vision statements are actually more intentionally better suited as a purpose than they are a vision. LinkedIn's a great example. They have this vision of globally connecting people for more opportunity in the workforce, right? To me, that's not a vision. I mean, sure,
Mhm.
you are doing it, but it's actually a purpose that you're doing. A vision is much more tangible. Like, here's the things we're going to do because we're getting to this point in a spot of time, right? So, well, I really love that. And I want to get into the topic today. And I'd like to read a little portion from an article about you. And I think it's a great segue, if you will. So here's the quoted part in this article, which is escaping the performance trap, and it's taking aim at a problem, the unintended fallout of goal setting systems like OKRs and quarterly KPIs. Instead of inspiring true achievement, these systems can end up creating performance theater. I love that word, by the way, performance theater, where passionate employees lose motivation and genuine collaboration falls away, all because the focus on hitting numbers stifles curiosity and long term thinking. So I'm going to leave it open to you and where we go with this. But I thought that that little statement alone really gives the listeners a good, source of truth of what we're going to be talking about here, which is just an amazing, excerpt from you. So let's go into it a little bit.
So thank you for sharing that. And so let's talk about, how people can see this happening in their organizations today. What happens when you set a target is it incentivizes people to show you that they've met that target because they want to please you. They want to be high performers, right? And so they'll show you, ta-da, look, I've hit those numbers. And it's not even malicious. It's not necessarily faking numbers or anything. Even genuinely, what it encourages me to do is it encourages me to look at the positive numbers to show you, look, I'm achieving whatever you wanted, that whatever
Mhm.
this initiative was, look at it is working, the numbers are looking good. That is the mindset it's creating in me. What you need instead from frontline employees is to actually have curiosity, to really look at not just the good numbers and sweep aside the bad numbers, but to actually look at those bad numbers, play detective, and say, I wonder what happened there. Why are we seeing those numbers? What is it actually telling us? Is there an opportunity? Is there a problem that we need to address? But all that sort of curiosity goes away. Another such example is on the sales side. I was talking to someone in sales, and they were saying how even though they were good at sales, they hated their work because there wasn't creativity to it. They felt like, it was all about just doing sort of the same thing over and over. And it didn't even feel collaborative with their colleagues because, well, I have my numbers, you have your numbers. Why am I going to help you? I want to hit my targets. Why would I help you with yours? Right? And this is not the sort of thinking we want in organizations. We want collaborative work in solving the complex problems that we're tackling as an organization. That's really what you want. You want, as a leader, the good and the bad information from the front lines so that you have the feel on the ground and you know how fast you can take that turn, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I love everything you're saying because we can see this, and for us, we might determine for us in our firm, we might determine some of this as like unhealthy competition. We might determine that some of it is that a little bit of consumerism, like when you ask somebody, well, why do you want to hit that big revenue mark? What's it for? You know, and the answers are kind of set you back a little bit when you get an answer of, well, we can provide more opportunity. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Like who's getting the opportunity and what does that mean? And there is like you talked about stifling the curiosity, right? I think that's a part that we need to go into because if you give yourself all these targets that you've got to hit, you hit them, but you don't ask the questions of the why for the good and bad. What does that do? I mean, this has to be connected to the future of the sustainability of your business, which I know is a vague term, but what we mean is, can your business be around in 50 more years because it's creative, it's innovated its way to the top, and it's become a market leader? Can you do that if you're just talking about numbers? Don't numbers lie in some way? So anyways, a lot that you said
Oh,
there was really good. So let's go into that a little bit.
I love what you said about, let's start with the last thing you said, which was, don't numbers lie anyway? And to which people will say, well, that just means you're not setting the right goals. So you're not setting the right OKRs, right? So if you just track the right metrics, everything will be fine. Well, let's talk about that, right? Because here's an example. I want to give the example of dating apps, where
Well, wait, before you go to the dating apps, just so the listeners know, OKRs, I know a lot of people are familiar with them, right? But KPIs, key performance indicators, OKRs, objectives and key results, all these are like what you're saying is just very much goal oriented. Like here's the goal, go hit it. A lot of times numbers are associated with this. So anything else you would give backstory on this before we keep talking about it?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And so uh, there are just so many different labels and names for goal setting, but the underlying mindset is really the same. OKRs is objectives and key results. And it seems like it's a new idea because it was published, because John Doerr published a book, Measure What Matters,
Yeah.
in just
Yep.
2018. So it seems like, oh, this is brand new, and Google says this was the key to our success. But no, that idea actually is pretty old. It came from Andy Grove at Intel, who
Yep.
instituted OKRs at Intel in the late 70s and 80s. And if you dig into that, you go like, oh, wait, where did Andy Grove get the idea from? It was from Peter Drucker's Management by Objectives. And it's a slight tweak to that. It goes all the way back to 1940s, right? So this idea of goal setting has not been challenged since the 1940s. And if you think about the workforce and how different it is from the 1940s up to now, and the fact
Mm.
that we haven't challenged this way of thinking to tackle the problems of today's workforce, it is astounding.
That is such a great point. And I interrupted you as you were going into example, but great point. It hasn't been challenged because for a lot of companies, it's meant their growth. Like they've grown on this idea of goal setting. But for a good portion of companies that I've seen, even personally, it's also meant you've lost a lot of really good people because you've wringed them dry, or you put your head down so long and for so hard that you were hitting the numbers and all this stuff, but you missed out on what was the new upcoming things that were opportunities for you, and so you declined some opportunity by doing that as well. So there's a lot of reasons that you could probably go into there, but you were talking about a
Oh,
dating app example.
Let's actually keep going with that for a little bit longer. I'm going to keep teasing our listeners. I'll get
Okay.
to the dating apps
All right, all
in
right, all
just a
right.
moment. Hang in there.
Yeah, yeah,
But
good job.
so let's talk about, this mindset that we have, that golden OKRs work, that, we've built our businesses on that, right? And let's think about, well, what exactly worked? When did goals and OKRs actually function, and what doesn't work? So, in the 1940s, the reason why management by objectives and goal setting was so revolutionary was because instead of using command and control at General Motors, Peter Drucker worked with General Motors to say instead, set targets together with employees, and then you can measure them by it. And what was General Motors' problem at the time in the 1940s? They had mostly an unskilled workforce that was working on repetitive tasks, and there was very little automation on their manufacturing floors. And
Yes,
so
good point.
it
Yeah.
was really easy to tell that, this person here is installing 45 tires, this person here is doing 40. There's one right way to install tires. So, I can tell who's a better performer really easily. But now we take the same idea and we say, okay, we have much more complex problems. Anything that could be automated mostly is. And so you apply the same ideas of goal setting on a complex manufacturing floor, like at Boeing, and you say, okay, now I'm going to take this problem and evaluate the skilled laborers or the skilled employees who are working on building a plane, where most of these tasks, they're not necessarily automated, and this is where you have quality problems of panels flying off of the plane, right?
Well, let's not get into this now, but yeah, big deal, right? Big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
But um, but the same idea sort of holds true whether you're looking at academia, where you're solving complex problems. That's more like puzzles. And when you say, I'm going to measure a researcher by how many papers you're putting out, you see the kind of toxic environment it creates in academia, where people are falsifying data. There are crappy papers out there, and it creates a toxic environment of people usurping each other's work, right? So, what research shows is when you have complex problems that you're trying to solve, it doesn't work to use goal setting. What we really need is a different approach.
Yes. And so this approach, what are some of the best practices, some of the best methods that you talk about and that get us to almost like a sandwich approach? Like goals aren't always terribly bad, right? There's some that are good to hit, but you're talking about something that's kind of stair stepping up to it in some ways. How would you state that in a better way in your own way?
Yeah. So, your point about goals aren't necessarily bad. Let's reframe that a little bit, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, aren't there numbers that I can objectively say, hit these numbers and it's going to get me better business results? And so this is where I want to go back to the dating app
Okay. Yes, we're
example.
here again. Yes,
Finally.
we're here. Let's go.
So I'll give the dating app example of what I mean by going after numbers, and then we'll talk about what puzzles means instead. So the dating app example is, you know, so in 2023, Tinder came out and it changed the face of the dating app world. Why? Because what they came up with was the swipe left and swipe right, which drove user engagement stats, right? User engagement numbers went through the roof. And user engagement in dating is super important as a metric to measure, because, it's only if your user engagement is high that you can actually monetize it, right? So what
Right.
happened? They pursued this user engagement number. It went through the roof. All the other dating apps said, ooh, look at that. It's working so well. We should do the swipe left and swipe right too.
Yeah.
Great. Everyone started doing the swipe left and swipe right. And everyone had fantastic stats in terms of user engagement. So then you go like, okay, so what's the problem? Everyone did well, right? Well, it worked in the short term. It worked in the short term. Numbers were great, but what did it actually do? It dehumanized interactions. It gamified intimacy. So, which meant that now in the dating world, what has changed is I just see someone as as this picture that I can swipe left or right. It's no longer another human that I'm interacting with, right? And
Right.
so because of that mindset, it created this toxic environment, and people felt dating app burnout. And so basically, chasing numbers, chasing user engagement created dating app burnout, which in the long run meant people were just getting off dating apps because they just were burnt out by it. And the entire industry now is in a slump, to the point where Bumble just laid off 30% of its staff. So the mindset that these companies had was, how do I optimize for user engagement numbers? What they should have asked is a puzzle question, because they're solving a complex problem. They should have looked at the puzzle of, how can we improve the dating experience while still monetizing this? Right?
Mm.
That was the puzzle they didn't get to.
Okay, I'm glad that you teased us on we're going to be waiting on this dating app example, because that was really good. I mean, it really shows us that the goal of just big numbers actually took them in a diminishing return, basically is how I see it. And I think, you know, I think a lot of the listeners are leaders in their own businesses and all this. So if we think about how this applies to a small, a medium-sized business, or even corporately, I mean, these goals can do the same thing, right? So, what are some of the examples you can provide in some of these businesses that you've seen that you've got to have a different approach? And then, really, we need to get into some of these different approaches. How do we see it as a puzzle and solve those problems? Which I can't wait to talk about.
Okay, so let's get into an example. So here's a company that I've been working with for 2 years. It's called Signal Ocean. So I've been consulting for them, and I was brought in 2023 when the CEO shared that, sales had stalled, and even the usage of the platform had stalled. And the company had OKRs. So the CEO had brought in OKRs as a way for everyone in the organization to be really rigorous about measurement and driving business results, right?
Hmm.
And what I was observing was, sometimes we met those OKRs, sometimes we didn't, but the underlying reality didn't change, that we hadn't managed to fix this or figure out this puzzle of, how do we get sales to start, how do we grow the business again, right? And so this is where I realized that we needed a different mindset. Instead of chasing numbers, where, the product team, like, we were looking at numbers, and then we were and they would sort of try an experiment, see, oh, it's not really moved the numbers, move on. Right? Let's try this next experiment. And this is sort of what we are taught over and over. Just iterate, see what works, and keep going. But there's a
Mm.
huge component of experimentation, reflection, and adaptation that gets to the heart of building the muscle of puzzle solving, that we haven't really built this muscle in organizations, because that curiosity muscle had atrophied over time. So so I'll tell you a little bit about Signal, so that we can talk about how did we frame the puzzle. So Signal, it is a company in the maritime industry. So they provide data, and they have a fantastic data platform that helps you figure out how to match the best ship to the best cargo, um, that, like, best matching and predictions, etc., for doing this. Right? That's the simplest way to explain it. And so the puzzle that we figured out as we looked at data was, we looked at who's using this. And we said, aha, the puzzle is that it's mostly tech savvy brokers who are using the product. Whereas we really want, not just the tech savvy people, because you can imagine the maritime industry and the shipping business, it's not mostly tech savvy, it's mostly tech averse people. But those tech averse people, those who have ships and those who have cargoes, they're not using it. It's mostly these brokers who are tech savvy. So why is that happening? So that was the puzzle. And so puzzle solving. So first of all, by the way, instead of talking about this just as targets, right? We still had targets in the sales team, but we really focused on what's the puzzle that we're trying to solve. And this is how we described the puzzle. How do we
Yeah.
grow beyond to those tech averse users? So solving the puzzle. This is the framework for solving the puzzle. And by the way, the entire framework, it's called objectives, hypotheses, and learnings. So OHLs. So the objective was this puzzle that we set. Now now we're going to talk about hypotheses and learnings. So in solving the puzzle, we had to ask 3 questions. So the first question was, how well is it working? So whatever we're trying right now, how well is it working? The second question is, what did we learn? So not just spitting out lots of stats, like how many weekly active users, how much time spent on site, bounce rate, blah blah. Like that's just a bunch of stats. But what did we learn? What's the actual story? And then the last question is, what will we try next? Based on how well it went and and what we learned, what will we try next? Right. And so,
Yeah.
what did we? So I'll pause there for a moment before I go on.
No. You're definitely giving us this in-depth look of what it means to solve a puzzle. I almost, just when you're saying this, some feedback that I've heard in the past from executives is that like problem solving feels like a waste of time. It feels like you're doing so many discussions, not enough decisions, right? But
Ah,
you've got to speak to this because I think that there's a lesson to learn here, and that there's got to be an innovative way to share, like, hey, you're not wasting time, right? So anyways, that's just what my mind
oh,
went when you were.
no, I love it. Thank you for bringing that up because you're exactly right. Sometimes problem solving just feels like we're all over the place. It feels like it's so unproductive. We're not getting anywhere. And this creates the scaffolding so that you can really get into this in a way that makes sense, right? In a way that you're talking about not just all sorts of problems, but exactly what is relevant in that moment. It gives you scaffolding to have meaningful conversations. Here I am giving the example of Signal and this big maritime puzzle we had, but you, let's talk about an example that a leader might be thinking of. Right now, maybe I'm solving the puzzle of, we have a culture where I want to solve the culture problem of, I want people to speak up. We have quiet voices in the room. People are not speaking up. Maybe that's the culture problem. How do we fix that? And the puzzle there might be, how well is it working? Well, what are we doing right now that may or may not be working well? We talk about exact details there. Maybe it's that there are a few people dominating the conversation. Can we all take a breath, or like just count 5 before someone else says the next thing? Maybe that's one thing we can try
Yeah.
next, right? Like we talk about how well is it working? What are we learning? Why are the quiet people kind of quiet? And then what will we try next, right? So that gives you scaffolding.
Yeah, I love that. And it literally just takes time. You can't rush through this in a sense to where, I mean, you can give yourself time constraints, sure, that might be healthy, but you can't just blow past it and expect that your reflection is going, or your hypothesis, or what, the way that you're framing is hypothesis, but you can't blow past that. It's got to be something that you crack open and you try to. So my question to you, because I'm thinking about how this would work, um, what different pockets of the organization are you bringing in? Is this like just top line leaders, or when you're solving these problems, are you bringing everyone who touches it? Like, what's some of the theory behind that?
Oh, yeah. So, what you just said about, how much time does it take? Like, you can't, maybe this does take time. So, as a leader, you may not get into all the details of this problem solving in one meeting, right? You definitely don't want to do that. In fact, once you've framed this puzzle, like after you frame this puzzle, you might have a little bit of discussion in terms of guiding questions, what might be going on, and you invite people to contribute to what might be going on. But then give people this puzzle to go solve, give them that ownership. They take this puzzle, they go back, and they're going to figure out the answers to how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? And they come back to you with those answers. Now you have a
Yeah.
really productive way of working through this and giving them feedback because they've come up with their solution. You tell them, what you think of what they're going to try next. This is your opportunity to say, what you just said you want to try next. Whoa, that's way too expensive. Here are your constraints. What could you do using these constraints? And then they might say, okay, I could try this smaller experiment next, right? So that's the feedback loop. So this isn't just something you use at a leadership level. On the contrary, this gives you scaffolding so that you can build that experimentation, learning, adaptation muscle in your team. And that's how we went about it in Signal, in this maritime company. When in fact I told the leader, let's not use OKRs, it was a bit scary because, well, it feels
Sure.
like you're
Yeah.
asking me to sort of jump into this abyss, no goals, now what? And so we didn't immediately abandon OKRs at all. In fact, I started using these OHLs with the product team, and they started solving this puzzle, and I was giving them guidance as we were working through how well did it work? What have we learned? What are you going to do next? On the product, and we started seeing real business results. It's not that it took up my time so much. It was more that, so this is the assurance for leaders. It's more like I'm giving scaffolding to the team so that people at different skill levels have different levels of freedom and competence, and you're harnessing everyone's strength and competency and giving them the right level of scaffolding to solve different sizes of puzzles, right?
Yeah, I love that. And so the first one was objective. So you had some questions underneath there. What are the questions that you frame again? And then we'll go on to the hypothesis piece, right?
Yeah, great. So let me first, rather than take the maritime example, I'll share a sales example, right? So let's say this might be something that any leader can identify with. Maybe, a sales target you might have set would have been, we need to hit X million by the end of this year.
Hmm.
Instead, if you're setting a puzzle, the way I would frame it as an objective is I'd say, okay, the market expects us to hit X million by the end of the year, but here's the puzzle I see towards getting to this. The puzzle I see is sales grew in the last 3 years, but they've stalled recently. What might be going on? How do we get back to that growth trajectory by solving this puzzle? And here are some guiding questions where I'd invite other leaders to come join me, right? So the guiding questions might be, is there something that has fundamentally changed in the market that, maybe competition is doing that we are just lagging behind?
And is
Maybe
this
it's
part of
on
the
this.
hypothesis part? This is now you getting into the hypothesis or not yet?
Not yet, because we don't
Okay.
fully understand the problem yet.
Oh,
To
okay, got
really
it.
have a hypothesis, we have to have the puzzle clear enough in our heads and a
Okay.
solution, right? So
Yeah.
we'll get to the hypothesis in just a moment. So guiding questions might be, market has changed. Maybe it's that in terms of sales, we knew how to sell to the early adopters. We didn't know how to sell to the mass market. So maybe sales needs to do some digging into that. Is there something wrong with our messaging that's not resonating for the mass market? Is it that,
Yeah.
the leadership structure is different? We're not selling the right way for the mass market, right? So that's some sales puzzles to go figure out. Then there might be a product puzzle in here. It might be that, maybe our needs met, maybe our product met the needs of the early adopters. Maybe we're not meeting the needs of the mass market. What might be happening there, right? That's another puzzle to go figure out. And at a leadership level, we're coordinating this sort of bigger puzzle. But within that, each team has a puzzle to go figure out. And the hypothesis part is really, once you have clarity on the puzzle, what experiment am I going to try? That's when you have hypotheses.
Yeah, so I like that. And I think that, when I'm picturing people in a room discussing this, you're probably bringing up all sorts of things that you wouldn't have thought of if you didn't frame it in a way like this, right? I bet people are surprised. I mean, I think of it as reflection, but also just like, well, what if, or why is that? Like, we blow past this stuff as a business or even personally a lot, right? I mean, this is, yeah, very important. So then into the hypothesis side, what then is the carry on from that? From the objective, I mean.
Yeah, so the objective sets the puzzle. Now we have to build the muscle for puzzle solving. And so that's where you ask the three questions. How well is it working? what have we learned? What are we going to do next? And this is where the learnings, the hypotheses, etc., come in. So in terms of how well did it work, this is where we have to define a hypothesis, right? So if I'm looking at the product side of this big puzzle of, why are so maybe if our product isn't meeting the needs of the mass market, why is that? There, I might have to do some digging in, right? I first will go
Right.
talk to customers, etc. And this is where I figure out, like, what's actually happening. Why aren't we meeting the needs of the mass market? How do they work? Maybe the early adopters are super tech savvy. They knew exactly what to do, and the mass market, they didn't quite know what to do, right? Maybe they're tech averse, etc. So I guess this brings us back to the signal example, right? So as we started to dig into the market a bit, we found that most of the maritime industry, they're tech averse. And what was interesting was, for them, the signal platform, because it was so amazingly accurate, it felt like magic. So it felt like you're spitting out magic numbers for me. I have no idea where you got those numbers. And because I'm tech averse, I don't trust those numbers. But
So
if
like a
you
transparency issue, yeah?
Exactly. But there again, if you gave me too much information and made it so transparent, oh, no, 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 that's just too much information. You're overwhelming me. Your platform just looks scary, right? So that's the puzzle.
Yeah.
How do we not make it look like magic, but yet we don't want to scare you by giving you all this information that feels like, whoa, 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 wait a minute.
Okay. And so the hypothesis is trying to answer those questions that you had under that
Exactly.
to frame it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the hypothesis was, if we try this particular experiment, and we tried certain ways to, simplify things. So, here you have a vessel, and if you do this, it very simply shows you XYZ, and it walks you through exactly what you wanted to know, but we had to do a lot of investigation to figure out what would make it simple. And then based on that, we wrote a hypothesis saying, if we try this experiment, then we expect to see this because this is the connection. And then we
Yeah.
were able to measure leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicators are things that you would know instantly, or not instantly, but very quickly. You would know whether people are actually finding this helpful or not. And the lagging indicators are typically sales, right? Because you wouldn't know for a long time if something is going to sell more or not. That doesn't tell you
Right.
right away whether your experiment worked or not. So this is the first question of, how well did it work? So you've defined this particular solution and the experiment, and you're trying it out. And then the next question is, what did you learn, right? And this is where we learned whether this experiment was working or not, but there was more information underneath, when we uncovered sort of, okay, this information here makes it feel like less magic. If we just add these following buttons where they click the button and they say, fill in this data, now they suddenly feel like they have control. So we could have
Yeah.
automated that, except by adding this button, it felt like, oh, now I know I'm choosing to fill in this data from this source. It suddenly gave them control. So this is an example of what we learned in terms of their mindset, that they wanted this control. And that was what we decided to try next, that we would give them such control, because that made it feel like less magic, more my action.
Yeah, and great example, by the way. And I love the real time, because it sounds like this is, recently over the last 2 years, you said. So good,
Yeah.
good example. Give us the acronym again.
It's objectives, hypotheses, and learnings, OHLs. And
Yeah.
objective is the puzzle setting. Hypotheses and learning is where you have the scaffolding with the 3 questions of, how well is it working? What have you learned? What are you going to do next?
Yeah, really love that. I'm sitting here thinking, it's funny that if you don't do this kind of systematic approach, well, I'm sorry if I call it systematic, because, it's supposed to be innovative and stuff. So I don't want to call it systematic, but there's a framework to it, obviously. If you don't follow something like this, you might get in the trap of being like, well, just send more guys out there, just hire more people, or we just need more sales, right? Like, you do all these things and you're like, well, throwing more at it may not be the answer. And actually, a lot of times what I'm seeing is more is not the answer. It's not more revenue is the answer. It's not more processes are the answer. More people is the answer. It's actually a problem that you have to solve. So I love how you frame it as a puzzle because it really is, right?
I love what you said because, traditionally the idea would have been, oh, let's just add more features. And in fact, that was what we were doing in the past, right? Let's just add more features. But then, once we started taking this approach of let's really solve the puzzle, you discover you need to do fewer things and you get better results. And the results, the business results, are the part that I think are the most powerful element of the story. Where sales had stalled in 2023, we doubled revenues in 2024, we doubled revenues in 2025, and we dropped customer churn from 26% in 2023 all the way to 4% in 2025.
How about results? That's what I'm talking about. That's results, right? Results, but not by goals, by innovatively solving problems that really existed. And I would say that, this is, you called it the performance trap. I would also throw a little phrase in there of, we just love being entertained. It's the entertain trap too. Like, we think that if we entertain our customers a little bit differently, or if we throw a spin on it, we add a new ad to it, or whatever, it's like, this is not what they want. It doesn't bring them the highest value. We're trying to entertain people, even ourselves, right? This is good because what I think of also when you're going through this framework is that, you know, when we do strategic type planning for the next year with companies and stuff, it's easy to be like, well, if we, maybe we do a nice big training program for our employees and that'll help them want to stay longer. And it's like, what problem is that? I don't know what problem that's solving. Well, it's solving,
Hmm.
we got a retainage problem here. It's like, okay, these are the kind of things that you have to break it down more like you're sharing with us. I love it. I think it's really good. What would you leave with the audience before we go into some of these rapid fire questions? What would you leave with the audience that you think is just going to be impactful for them to think about as they've heard this framework?
Yeah, maybe what I can leave the audience with is practical tips in terms of what can you do next. So first of all, you can get the OHL's toolkit. Just it's a free download, and I can share a link with you afterwards. But using that OHL's toolkit, it gives you this slides template so that you can start to use this right away to set puzzles and also to build that muscle of how well did it work? What have we learned? What are we going to do next? Right. And as a leader, the practical tip I'd share is just try this out for yourself. Take an initiative and think through those questions in terms of, how well did it work? What have you learned? What would you try next? Even as you answer these questions, right? What you'll discover is it's building that muscle. And if you present it to the team in this way and help them see how you think through the good and the bad metrics and how you're thinking about learnings and what you would try next, etc., you're helping build that mindset in your team as well, in terms of experimentation, learning, and adaptation. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is you can then start to give your team such puzzles as well, get their feedback in setting those puzzles. And as they're solving them, be very honest in terms of giving feedback. Never shoot the messenger. Like, you want to see the good and the bad metrics, but the feedback that I give teams is about, in terms of what have we learned? What are you going to try next? This is where a lot of my feedback really centers because I want to understand the depth of their thinking in solving the puzzle. If it's not deep enough thinking, like, I'll ask a couple of questions and see, okay, this was very superficial analysis. Come on, like,
Yeah.
tell
Well,
me
I
the
was
real
going to give
story
you
here.
Yeah, I was going to give you a little plug here and that's why you need an expert facilitator like Radhika here, because you need someone from the outside. I mean, I truly believe this. When I was in the corporate world, I was a big fan of bringing someone from the outside because they ask questions because they don't know your business like you. So they ask clarifying questions that make you go, "Wait, I don't really know why we do that. We've been doing it. I don't know. Like, why do we do that? So bringing in a facilitator like yourself is going to raise the bar in this whole world of innovating, not just adding more revenue to the top line. Like, it's going to help you solve the biggest problems of your organization without a doubt. So anyways, that's my plug for you. So there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I appreciate that.
Now, rapid fire round. I want to end with these because I think this is telling of just the personality of who you are. So, favorite movie?
Okay. Well, uh, uh, no judgment, people. Here we go. It's
No judgment.
it's Love Actually. I know that sounds cheesy, but I'll tell you the favorite part for me in the whole movie is where Hugh Grant says about the Heathrow Airport arrivals terminal, where he says, when you look at the arrivals terminal, people are always so happy to see each other, and you see that love actually is everywhere. And I love that.
Yes.
That is just how I see the world.
Listen, we need some of that cheesy love in our lives, okay? Like, that is a good viewpoint. I love it. Yes. Tells a little bit about how your idea of love is everywhere is good. I love it. All right. So, favorite quote. Give me your favorite quote.
Oh, it's actually a quote I came across just in the last year that we learn from. Sorry, let me get this right. It's from John Dewey, and he said, "We learn not from experience, but by reflecting on experience." I thought that was so brilliantly important, right? We learn not from experience, but by reflecting on experience. That it really makes us realize that we have to take time to be able to reflect, to therefore learn.
Oh, I love that. And I think personally or as a business, like, if you don't do that, yeah, you're not actually learning. So that's really good. Love that. All right. So if you were to go back and tell yourself something 10 years ago, what would it be?
Um, it would be that 10 years ago, I had sometimes this mindset of, oh, I wish I could go back and change XYZ. Right. And now I look back and I realize, wow, that was all so just unnecessary in terms of that way of thinking. The thing I would tell myself 10 years ago is every single experience, good or bad, defines who you are, that we grow from all of these experiences, that we don't have to change anything in the past. It's about reflection and being able to grow from it. And that has sort of been one of the biggest lessons in life, that, life is the whole spectrum, all the bright colors and the dark, that the brights are only brighter because of the contrast with the dark, and so you sort of
Oh,
need all the colors. You don't have to sort of change anything. It's more that you have to reflect, learn, and sort of plan what you would do differently next time.
I love that. And I think we had a guest on it that kind of shared a similar way of looking at it. And if I'm quoting him correctly, it was, don't fight it so much. Like, you thought it was such a bad thing in the time, but 10 years later, it's like, that actually was really healthy for me to go through. And yeah, it's good to have the good and bad. It forms who you are. That's amazing. Well, I love that. And seriously, it was a pleasure having you on here, Radhika. And really appreciate your insight and some of your framework. And I hope that our audience is leaving with something practical that they can actually do today.
Thanks so much for having me. I've so truly enjoyed this conversation.
Yes. And if you want to pick up her book, Radical Product Thinking, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it in other places. But go pick it up. It is a wonderful book. Obviously, if you enjoyed this podcast, we'll have her website in the podcast show notes. And that wraps things up for today. Thanks for joining us. Join us next time, where we continue to learn together how to develop ourselves and the people around us. Hey, please don't forget to share this podcast, write a review. We're on all major platforms, and we'd be more than honored to hear feedback from you. So we'll see you next time, and we'll talk later.